The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome folks to a brand new look TVI channel, and we're in a brand new part of the country to begin this new look. This is the Forest of Dean, which we've yet to touch here in Gloucestershire. Behind me there you can see St Andrew's Church, which is in the parish of Woolaston. Woolaston, Wolflaff's Farm. Hello everyone, it's time for a new era of TVI with a brand new theme tune and a fresh new look. To go with those, I'm also treating you all to a new series too. For the first time on the channel, we're in the Forest of Dean. It's a wonderful magical area that marks the point where England becomes Wales. For our first instalment, we're in Woolaston. Williston lies to the north of the Severn estuary, approximately 5 miles away from the Welsh border at Chepstow. It contains a main village and several small hamlets, and the whole thing is surrounded by woodland and agricultural land. The main village can be split into various pieces, including Nether End and Woolaston Common, which are pretty much contiguous with one another today. From an economic standpoint, Williston has always been associated with farming. It used to contain a large dairy some years ago now, but this has been converted into a small housing estate. Although it's much more of a commuter village than it used to be, recent developments have consolidated rather than expanded the village footprint. Landmarks wise, Woolaston doesn't possess many, but there's enough of interest. The Anglican church is a ways away from the village along the A48, but in the main cluster you'll find a lovely village shop, 2 pubs, a sports field, a memorial hall, and even an old Methodist chapel too. So, for the first time in the Forest of Dean, let's get those walking boots on and go and see all of that. I promise you, this series will leave you in awe. We start with the parish church of St Andrew, located about a mile southwest of the Nether End area of the main Woolaston village. It's just off the A48 towards Chepstow. The earliest record of its existence is in 1131. However, the old circular churchyard and a nearby Roman road, which ran just to the northwest of this, suggest a much earlier holy site existed here. The main building material here is old red sandstone. St Andrews has a chancel, nave, south aisle, north tower and south porch. The font is 14th century and it's octagonal in shape. The pulpit dates from about 1750. The tower was originally a low one with a short wooden steeple, but following the granting of a faculty in 1774, it was completely rebuilt. It was rebuilt again in 1859 by J.W. Hagnall after a new aisle was added some 20 years prior. Its north vestry dates back to 1903. It was threatened with closure in 2007, but at the final midnight mass on Christmas Eve, it was announced that the church would be saved, and it continues to thrive to this day. Here's a quick look at the adjoining cemetery before we hit the road momentarily to check out High Woolaston. Now get used to these narrow country lanes, the Forest of Dean is full of them. Some are quite challenging to drive on, as you'll see in upcoming episodes, but the ones here in High Woolaston aren't too bad. High Woolaston is the name given to the scattering of hamlets and isolated buildings to the north of the church and the A48 and southwest of the main village. Historically, this area does have a few bits of note. In 1683, a small Iron Age fort was identified in these parts, and there are earthworks that show its location at High Woolaston Farm. Furthermore, a large Roman villa in a field called Chester's east of Woolaston Grange was partly excavated between 1932 and 1935. The villa was apparently built in the first half of the 2nd century before being destroyed and rebuilt in around 320 AD. The Romans had quite an influence on this particular part of Gloucestershire, and they were way ahead of their time. The villa is thought to have had a lighthouse to guide vessels past the offshore Guska Rocks. High Woolaston was regarded as a separate hamlet by 1703 when it contained around 20 families. That suggests it was quite a sizable place 300 years ago. Indeed, one clear indication of its former extent is the fact that it once had a blacksmith shop, which appears in records in 1769. Today, the biggest business that's close to the hamlet is Wyvern Garage, where the road that snakes through the settlement meets the A48, Gloucester to Chepstow Road. Also, between the garage and the main Woolaston village is a huge car boot sale site and Sheep House caravan park. Now we're a little further north and we're coming into the main village shortly. Before we get there, the road passes the Woolaston Inn. This pub was originally called the Duke's Head and was located on the other side of the A48 on the corner of Station Road. It was briefly known as the Queen's Head in the 1850s, but by 1863 it was called the Woolaston Inn. In 1891, Gloucester-based brewery Gardner and Branch owned the pub before the licence was transferred to this new building in 1961. The original building became a private residence called Brookend House. In August 1985, the Woolaston Inn reopened after a £40,000 facelift. The alterations included a split-level bar and a revamped fast food kitchen. Okay, so here we are then in Woolaston Village, which we are going to have a walk around shortly, but the rain has decided to fall right now, so that means I've just got to sit in the car and wait for it to pass a little bit. I don't mind getting wet a bit, but at the moment it's quite heavy, so we'll just sit here and wait, and then we'll get walking. When we do, our first landmark is the Memorial Hall. I'm currently parked in its car park, which is not just for the hall, it's also for the playing field, which you can maybe see out of my car windows here. Our main walk starts at the Woolaston Memorial Hall. This is a modern, accessible facility that's a key part of this rural community. Bright and popular, village clubs and societies use this on a regular basis. It also holds parish council meetings too. Over 70 people can be comfortably seated for a special event. On a clear day, which this wasn't, you can see the River Severn from here. The hall is set within the playing fields. This contains a children's play area and a community orchard, as well as a football pitch. This central hub is the focal point of Woolaston Village. Now, you may not realise it, but standing on these playing fields, you're actually atop a really high hill. To get to our next landmark, we have to drop several feet into a shallow valley where Woolaston borders Alvington, the next parish over to the east. This is the former Swan Inn, which sits in the Colne Valley. The pub's location is between the villages of Woolaston and Alvington, at right angles to the A48 and next to the Colne Brook. It has a history that can be traced back to the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. This was formerly a beer house before it was a pub. That's according to records in 1876. As a pub, it's now permanently closed too, but the building is still very much in use as a tea rooms. Their website describes it as the perfect venue to enjoy a morning coffee or a cream tea or even a glass of wine. I'll agree with that. The fast-running Colne Brook next to it was once used to power forges and paper mills in the valley. No doubt the Swan was once frequented by mill workers. Now, because we've dropped into the valley, we've got to get ourselves back out of it again. That means climbing a big hill, so it's up the A48 we go to find Nether End next. Here we have the local school. The history of this can be traced back to 1616 when Margaret Clayton established a charity for schooling 4 poor village children. This isn't the original school building, it's far too modern for that. Where the first school was located, nobody seems to know, but wherever it was later replaced by a new building at Gumstalls in 1818. That second establishment was a national school, but it was still supported by the Clayton charity, as well as by subscriptions. In 1818, there were as many as 120 children, 40 of whom came from Alvington. The Gumstalls building was eventually replaced by this newer national school at Nether End in 1862. It's been enlarged a few times, although now numbers are much fewer than they once were. Okay, so now we're heading towards the village shop, which is the modern replacement for that building you can see behind me there. That is the old post office, which of course is no longer a post office, it's now a residence. So let's continue walking. The rain has slowed down a little bit, which is a good thing. Got the coat on though, I am quite wet at the moment. We'll head for the shop next and see what that's all about. Before we hit the shop, we have pub number 2, but this one is still very much open. Like the Swan, this originated as a beer house. According to records, the Harris family owned the Nether End Inn in 1891. Speaking of owners, one of its more recent ones has an interesting tale to tell. I'm talking about Dave Dunstan, who owned the pub in the late 2000s. In 2010, an orphaned 2-week-old wild boar was found in the woods near the Nether End Inn. Dunstan took care of the animal, which he named Ella, and fed her on goat's milk. Now we come to the shop, which today is the only retail facility the village has, unless you count the Swan Inn tea rooms, which I don't because it's not a general shop. Williston has had several trades come and go down the years. Going way back to 1608, the village had a wheelwright, 2 weavers, a tailor and a baker. There was a shoemaker in 1620 and a butcher in 1813. By 1841 there were 9 shoemakers, 4 masons, 3 tailors, 2 butchers, 2 hawkers, a shopkeeper, a miller and a saddler, as well as specialist tradesmen already mentioned. Most men though were employed in agriculture. By 1856 there was a police station, a post office and a grocery store at Brook End. Into the 1950s there were 2 grocers and a butcher shop at Nether End, and mobile shops also visited the village too. How times have changed now. Now we're heading uphill again and through a housing estate as we make our way towards Woolaston Common and the Methodist Chapel. This is Woolaston Common Primitive Methodist Chapel. Methodism in the village has a complex history which spans several buildings. The Primitives originally met in a private house on the ring road at Woolaston Common before an actual chapel was built in 1867. This was enlarged in 1893 and a Sunday school room was added in the 1960s to celebrate its centenary. Even so, it's still considered to be a tiny chapel and now belongs to the Gloucestershire Methodist Circuit. Okay, we're not very far from the end of this walk, thankfully. Isn't British weather just absolutely glorious at times? It always rains more on the west coast than it does on the east coast. That's all to do with the mountainous relief in this part of the world. But yeah, it's certainly a little bit soggy. Indeed, from here it's just a simple case of making our way back to the Memorial Hall. There are 2 ways you can do it. One is by following the road, but the quicker and much more direct route is via a footpath off to the left. Guess which one I went for? Okay, we've made it back to the car park here outside the Memorial Hall and the playing field. We're not quite done with Woolaston just yet though. We need to do a little bit of more driving out to the north of the village. We've got to catch a pub called the Rising Sun, and that will complete this episode. Hopefully, by the time we get to the next one, this weather will have calmed down a bit. Keep your eyes on the left of the screen and you'll see our final landmark, the Rising Sun. Just like the Swan and the Nether End Inn, the Rising Sun was a beer house before 1876. It was once owned by Sir W. H. Marling between 1891 and 1903, who ran it as a free house. It's 350 years old and built of stone. Although it doesn't offer a view of the Severn, it's pretty handy instead for everything the other way, the gorgeous Forest of Dean. An eating out review in the Forester newspaper in May 2008 had glowing reviews of the Rising Sun. It said if you're looking for a traditional pub with great, hearty home-cooked food, you need look no further. So why don't you come to Williston and see if it really is as good as it sounds? See you tomorrow for more in the Forest of Dean. I'm here all week. Now Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.